Hello and welcome. Before we set sail into the world of the Vikings, I'd love for you to take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know in keeping these relaxing, informative journeys coming. And in the comments below, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? I always find it fascinating to see how far and wide our voyages reach. Now, let's begin. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing on the wooden planks of a longship. The air is cold, with a briny scent that stings the nose. Around you, men in wool tunics and leather belts secure ropes, adjust sails, and check supplies. This is not a cruise ship with comfortable cabins and a buffet. This is a Viking vessel, a marvel of craftsmanship, but a trial of endurance. For those who lived 1,000 years ago, these voyages were a test of body, spirit, and sheer willpower. For someone from the modern world, it's almost certain you would not last a day. Before we step fully aboard, it's worth understanding what the Vikings truly were and what they were not. The word Viking is often used to describe an entire culture, but originally it referred to the act of going on an overseas expedition, often with the aim of raiding or trading. The people we call Vikings were Norse seafarers from modern-day Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, active between roughly the late 8th and early 11th centuries. They were farmers, craftsmen, traders, and warriors, and their ships were the lifeblood of their world. Now, let's focus on the ship you've stepped onto. A Viking longship was a masterpiece of design for its time. Sleek, narrow, and built for speed. The hull was made from overlapping planks of oak, fastened with iron rivets and corked with tarred wool or animal hair to keep the water out. These ships were shallow drafted, meaning they could travel in both open seas and shallow rivers, perfect for surprise raids deep inland. But this design, while ingenious, came at a cost. The comfort of those on board was almost non-existent. First, you'd notice there is no deckhouse, no cabin, no enclosed space to shield you from the elements. The crew slept, ate, and worked entirely in the open. If the wind howled and the rain came down in icy sheets, there was nowhere to hide. At best, a coarse wool cloak could be pulled over your shoulders, but by morning, it would be heavy and soaked through. The cold would seep into your bones in a way that is difficult to imagine in a modern world full of central heating and dry blankets. The journey would begin with the rowing, the pure muscle-burning labor that powered the ship when the wind wasn't strong enough for the sail. Viking longships had anywhere from 20 to over 30 oars, and each was manned by a crew member. This was not leisurely rowing on a calm lake. You would be hauling a heavy wooden oar, often taller than yourself, through choppy, unpredictable seas. The motion was relentless, hour after hour, with short breaks for food or to switch positions. Hands would blister and split open, the salt water stinging each wound. The food on board would not offer much comfort either. Supplies had to be practical and long-lasting. Dried fish, hard bread, smoked meat, butter, and occasionally cheese. Fresh water was stored in barrels, but it could quickly take on a stale taste. And while the Vikings sometimes caught fish during the journey, the catch was never guaranteed. For the unaccustomed stomach, the combination of limited diet, constant motion, and salt air could easily lead to seasickness. A miserable state when there's nowhere to escape it. The mental strain would be just as fierce as the physical. Unlike today, there was no guarantee of a precise arrival time, or even a safe arrival at all. The crew's survival depended entirely on reading the skies, the wind, and the water. Skills you, as a modern passenger, likely wouldn't have. Navigators used the sun, stars, and sometimes primitive sun compasses to chart their way, but weather could cloud the sky for days, leaving everyone tense and uncertain. The fear of being blown off course into uncharted waters was very real. Even if the seas were calm, the threat of attack lingered. Viking voyages were not always peaceful. Rival crews, coastal defenders, or hostile forces could appear without warning. In such moments, every man on the ship became a warrior, grabbing weapons stored beneath the benches. For you, untrained in the use of axe, sword, or shield, the chaos of sudden combat would be overwhelming. And yet, to the Vikings themselves, this was not an ordeal, but a way of life. They were raised in coastal communities where seafaring skills were learned from childhood. They knew how to endure cold, wet clothes for days, how to keep balance on a rocking deck, and how to keep working through exhaustion. You, on the other hand, accustomed to the modern comforts of dry clothes, hot meals, and warm shelter, would quickly feel the weight of every moment. As the ship cuts through the waves, the first day alone would expose you to more hardship than most people experience in a lifetime today. And this is only the beginning. Over the next parts of this journey, we will explore the details of life aboard a Viking longship, the sleeping conditions, the dangers at sea, the challenges of navigation, the toll on the body, and the ever-present risks that meant survival was never guaranteed. In the distance, the horizon is an unbroken line of grey-blue, the sea stretching endlessly in every direction. There is no turning back. Night falls quickly at sea. The sail catches the last traces of sunlight before the horizon swallows the day, and the sky shifts from pale gold to deep indigo. Out here, there are no electric lights to push back the dark. Only the moon, the stars, and the occasional glow of a torch or oil lamp. For a modern traveller, this might seem romantic, even beautiful. But for you, exhausted and aching from a day of rowing or bracing against the wind, the real question would be, where do you sleep? The short answer is, you don't, at least not in the way you're used to. A Viking longship had no cabins or enclosed quarters for the crew. The deck was open from bow to stern, and your bed would be nothing more than the same wooden plank you sat on during the day. If you were lucky, you could spread a layer of sheepskin or straw beneath you, but these would soon become damp with spray from the sea. There were no pillows, no mattresses, and certainly no private space. Crew members slept shoulder to shoulder, their bodies huddled for warmth, cloaks pulled tight around them. The only protection from the cold, damp wind was the wool you wore. Even in summer, the temperature on open water could drop sharply at night, and the chill would seep into every bone. In winter voyages, rare but not unheard of, frost could form on your cloak before dawn. Sleep itself came in short, restless bursts. The ship never stopped moving. The creak of the hull, the slap of waves, and the constant shifting of bodies meant you could never truly sink into deep rest. One moment you might be jolted awake by a sudden tilt of the deck, the next by the call to man the oars if the wind died. If it rained, there was little to do but pull your cloak over your head and endure. Viking cloaks were often woven tightly and treated with lanolin from sheep's wool, making them somewhat water-resistant. But water-resistant is not the same as dry. After an hour in a cold drizzle, your clothing would cling to you, heavy and uncomfortable. The damp never truly left. It soaked into the wool, your skin, and your mood. Some Viking ships did carry a simple tent-like awning made from sailcloth, rigged over part of the deck when anchored or beached. But at sea, especially during long voyages, these were rarely practical to keep in place. Strong winds could rip them loose, and the crew needed clear access to sails, oars, and supplies. There was also no such thing as a set night's sleep. The crew worked in shifts, taking turns rowing, steering, or keeping watch. Even at night, someone had to man the tiller, monitor the wind, and scan the horizon for other ships or dangerous shorelines. If you were assigned to the night watch, sleep came in even shorter snatches, stolen between duties. And there was always the sea itself, unpredictable and sometimes hostile. A sudden squall could roll in, forcing the crew to haul in the sail or take up oars in the dark. The ship might pitch violently in heavy waves, and you'd have to cling to the nearest bench to avoid being thrown across the deck. In such moments, sleep was the last thing on anyone's mind. For the Vikings, this was normal. They had grown up on the edges of fjords and coastal waters, sleeping rough during fishing trips and coastal raids. Their bodies were adapted to these conditions, and they could function with far less rest than most of us today. But for you, the combination of cold, wet clothing, cramped sleeping space, and interrupted rest would quickly wear you down. After a single night, you'd already feel it, the heaviness in your limbs, the ache in your shoulders, the sharp awareness that you are far from home. Morning would not bring relief. The first light of dawn might be accompanied by a raw wind or the fine sting of sea spray. You would rise stiff and groggy, with no warm breakfast waiting, only the same hard bread and dried fish as the day before. And then, without hesitation, the day's labor would begin again. By the time the first light of morning begins to spread across the sky, the longship is already stirring. There is no slow waking here, no stretching in a warm bed or sipping coffee while the world comes to life. On a Viking voyage, the day begins with work, because work is the only thing keeping the ship in motion and the crew alive. If the wind is in your favor, the sail might carry the ship forward, freeing most of the crew from the oars. But winds are fickle, and on many days you will find yourself gripping an oar before you've even shaken off the last traces of sleep. Viking oars were no lightweight paddles. Each was carved from solid wood, often longer than a grown man's height, and heavy enough to make your shoulders ache after only a few strokes. Rowing a longship was not an occasional task. It could last for hours at a time, with only brief breaks to eat or change positions. The motion was a deep, steady pull, designed to keep time with the rest of the rowers on your side. Falling out of rhythm could throw off the pace of the whole ship and draw the sharp attention of the helmsman. The coordination was everything. The longship's speed and maneuverability depended on every man working in unison. For someone from the modern world, unused to this kind of sustained, full-body exertion, the strain would set in quickly. Your arms would burn, your lower back would tighten, and blisters would bloom across your palms. And even if the skin split and bled, there was no pause for recovery. You wrapped the wound in cloth, adjusted your grip, and kept rowing. When the wind did rise enough to hoist the sail, the labor shifted rather than disappeared. Viking sails were made from heavy wool, sometimes reinforced with leather, and coated with animal fat or tar to make them more resistant to the elements. Hoisting one was no simple matter. It took coordinated effort to lift it into position and tie it securely. Then came the constant adjustments, shifting the angle to catch the wind, hauling ropes tight when the breeze shifted, loosening them again when the gusts grew too strong. Every movement had to be efficient, because a misstep could mean lost speed, or worse, damage to the ship's rigging, and the work was never truly done. Even in calm weather, the longship had to be steered carefully using its large steering oar at the stern. The helmsman's task was both physically demanding and mentally exhausting, reading the wind, the waves, and the shifting patterns of clouds to keep the ship on course. And then there was the maintenance. Salt water is a slow destroyer, seeping into wood and iron alike. Between rowing and sailing duties, crew members inspected the hull for leaks, replaced worn ropes, and bailed out water that had seeped into the ship. A long voyage could wear down even the best-built vessel, and constant upkeep was the only way to avoid disaster. If you were part of the crew, there would be no assigned easy jobs. Every man was expected to row, to haul on ropes, to steer if needed, and to fight if the time came. There was no specialization. Versatility was survival. And here lies
one of the hardest truths for a modern traveller. There was no option to sit this one out. On a Viking longship, every able body was a working body. Illness or injury might earn you a little compassion from your shipmates, but unless you were completely incapacitated, you would be expected to do your part. A single person refusing to work could slow the entire crew, and slowing the crew could mean missing a safe harbor before nightfall, or failing to outrun a storm. By midday, the combination of muscle strain, raw hands, and unending motion would be enough to break the spirit of someone unprepared for this life. And remember, there was no end in sight. This wasn't a day trip or a weekend at sea. Viking voyages could last for weeks, sometimes months, depending on the distance and the weather. The rhythm of the work could
be hypnotic, almost meditative at first. The creak of the oarlocks, the splash of blades cutting through water, the deep collective breath of the rowers. But the human body, especially one untrained for this life, begins to rebel quickly. The weight of the oar drags at your arms, your shoulders scream with each pull, and your back aches from the constant forward and back motion. Your hands, now raw and blistered, are sticky with a mix of seawater, sweat, and your own blood. And then there is the heat. It's easy to imagine Viking voyages as endlessly cold and damp, but in summer, rowing under a blazing sun could be just as punishing. The reflection of sunlight on the water creates a relentless glare that stings your eyes and burns your skin. There is no shade, only the thin hope of a passing cloud. If the water barrels run low, thirst becomes another gnawing companion. The salt on your lips only makes it worse. Meals were brief and practical, taken without stopping the ship. A crewman might pass you a strip of dried meat or a chunk of hard bread as you kept one hand on the oar. Eating was less about enjoyment and more about staving off exhaustion. If you were lucky, there might be a moment to switch positions with another rower so you could rest your arms and legs. But the rest would never last long. Every man had to pull his weight. The labor didn't end when the oars were stowed. The ropes needed tending, knots tightened or replaced, the sail checked for wear. Tar had to be reheated and smeared into seams to keep the planks watertight. And all the while, the ship needed to stay on course, which meant someone, often you if it was your turn, stood at the stern, hands gripping the steering oar, eyes locked on the horizon. Sometimes the wind would shift suddenly, and the order would come to lower the sail. This could be a chaotic scramble, ropes whipping in the air, the heavy wool fighting you as you tried to bring it down before it tore. Once stowed, the sail had to be folded, tied, and secured against the deck, often while the ship rocked violently beneath your feet. And all of this was layered with the constant awareness that at any moment, the routine could be broken by danger. A sudden squall, a sharp cry of "ship" from the lookout, or the splintering sound of wood striking an unseen rock. The labor of a Viking voyage was not just about muscle, it was about readiness. For the seasoned Norse sailor, this rhythm was life itself. Exhausting, yes, but familiar, and almost comforting in its predictability. For you, the unaccustomed traveller, it would be a slow wearing down, hour after hour, until every part of your body begged for rest you could never truly have. It begins with subtle signs. The long, easy swells you've grown used to take on a heavier motion. The water beneath the ship feels different. Less like a floating floor, more like a living, shifting force. The wind, which had been filling the sail in a steady, reliable push, grows restless. It shifts direction, catching at odd angles, snapping the wool with sharp cracks. Overhead, clouds that had been scattered and harmless begin to knit together into a darker canopy. The Vikings knew to watch these changes. For them, the sea was a companion that could turn dangerous without warning. The helmsman's gaze is fixed on the horizon, reading signs you barely notice. The sudden drop. In air temperature, the slightly metallic scent in the wind, the faint hiss as whitecaps form on distant waves. To you, these are meaningless details. To the crew, they are warnings. The order comes abruptly. Lower the sail. The command is shouted once, then repeated as men rush to their stations. The heavy wool is pulled down in practiced motions, its wet weight threatening to drag it from numb fingers. It takes strength to control it in the gusts. Too much slack, and it can whip wildly, knocking a man to the deck. Once secured, the oars are taken up. The longship is now under pure muscle power, and every stroke matters. The sea's mood worsens. A wave strikes the bow hard enough to send a shudder through the entire hull. The shallow draft that allows this ship to slip into rivers now means it rides higher in the water than deep-keeled ocean vessels, making it quick to turn, but also easy for a wave to toss. The helmsman's job becomes critical, keeping the prow aimed directly into the oncoming swells. Turn too far to one side, and the ship risks being rolled. Rain arrives not as a gentle drizzle, but as a wall. It lashes faces, stings eyes, soaks clothes in minutes. Water streams from the edges of your hood and down your back until you are wet from head to foot. The sea spray joins it, flung over the sides in bursts that slap your skin raw. The deck becomes slick beneath your boots. Every step is uncertain, the wood shifting beneath you in ways that make balance a constant battle. You grip the oar with hands already blistered from days of labor. The salt water works its way into every split in your skin, a sharp, persistent burn that never fades. The muscles in your shoulders and back knot under the strain, but you have no choice except to keep moving. Each wave demands a response. Lean into the pull, push hard, keep time with the rower ahead of you. The rhythm is everything. Break it, and the ship loses its fight against the storm. The longship climbs each swell like a living thing, prow pointing toward the sky, oars slicing into air for a heartbeat before the hull tips forward into the trough. The drop is a gut-turning lurch as if the ship is being pulled down into the earth itself. When it hits the bottom, the next wave is already looming, a moving wall of grey-green water crowned with foam. The process repeats again and again, each cycle stealing more of your strength. Noise consumes the world. The wind howls through the rigging in a high, tearing scream. Waves crash against the hull in deep, booming thuds. The commands from the helmsman are shouts just to be heard, words carried half away by the gale. Your ears ring from the constant battering of sound, and still it does not relent. There is no escape from the cold. The wool of your cloak, once a comfort, is now heavy and sodden, clinging to your shoulders and legs. The water seeps into your boots, squelching with every shift of your feet. Your breath comes in visible bursts that vanish instantly in the wind. The cold creeps into your fingers and toes first, then works deeper, making even the simplest motion, gripping the oar, turning your head, feel slow and clumsy. For the seasoned Viking sailor, this is a test, but not an unfamiliar one. They know when to row hard and when to let the ship ride the swell. They know how to keep their bodies low and balanced, to work with the ship's motion, rather than fight against it. But for you, each movement is a struggle against an opponent you cannot see but can feel everywhere. In the wind clawing at your face, in the pull of the waves beneath you, in the burn of your muscles, screaming for relief. The storm stretches time. Minutes feel like hours. There is no horizon now, only the shifting grey of the sky and the rolling black of the water. The longship is a fragile strip of wood between them, creaking and groaning as it flexes against each blow. You realize how small it truly is, how little stands between you and the vast, cold weight of the sea. Your stomach twists with the unending motion. Seasickness, if it hadn't already taken hold, becomes a relentless tide of its own. The bitter taste of bile rises in your throat. You try to push it down. There's no pause to lean over the side without missing your stroke. The smell of wet wool, tar, and sweat fills your nose. And still, the storm has no sign of passing. The rain pounds harder. The swells grow taller. The oars dip and rise in unison. The sound like the heartbeat of the ship. The crew's faces are set in grim focus. Not fear, but the concentration of men who have done this before and know they will have to do it again. You, however, feel the limits of your body in every breath. Each wave takes a little more from you, a little more warmth, a little more strength, a little more will. There is no stopping until the sea decides to ease its grip. And it may be hours before that happens. The hours drag on until you lose track of time entirely. There is no sunrise or sunset in your mind anymore. Only the endless grey churn of water and the deafening roar of the wind. The world has been reduced to three things: the oar in your hands, the next wave ahead, and the will to keep going. The helmsman's voice cuts through the storm now and again, sharp commands that keep the prow from drifting off course. You notice his knuckles are white on the steering oar, the long beam shuddering under the strain of each swell. Every few minutes, he braces himself against the deck as the longship slams into the trough of a wave with a force that rattles your teeth. Water seeps in constantly, sloshing around the benches and pooling at your feet. A pair of crewmen work with buckets to bail it out, but the effort seems futile. For every gallon thrown overboard, another crashes down from above. The wood of the hull groans under the constant assault, its seams flexing with each impact. You find yourself glancing toward the sides of the ship more often than you'd like, wondering just how much punishment they can take. The rain changes character as the storm deepens. At first, it had been a steady sheet, but now it comes in driving bursts, needles of water carried sideways by the wind. Your face feels raw, as though sandpaper is being dragged across it. The wind itself has a voice, a rising, falling wail that moves through the ship's rigging, like some restless spirit, blending with the rhythmic groan of oars and the slap of waves. A sudden gust catches the ship just as a wave lifts it high, and for a moment you feel the whole vessel tip at a sharper angle than before. Your stomach lurches, your feet scramble for grip, and you hear the sharp, instinctive shouts of the crew as they lean into their oars to right the course. For a heartbeat, you think the ship might roll. Then the bow crashes down into the next trough, sending up a wall of spray that drenches everyone aboard. Your muscles ache beyond anything you've known. There's no space for stretching, no relief from the work. You simply grit your teeth and pull. Your breath comes in ragged bursts. The smell of tarred wood, wet wool, and human sweat is heavy in the air, mixing with the tang of salt until it's all you can taste. There's no comfort in the thought that the Vikings you sail with have endured this before. Their movements are sure and practiced, even graceful in the chaos, but yours are clumsy and slow. You are a weak link in a chain that cannot afford weakness, and you know it. The thought gnaws at you more than the cold. Every now and then, lightning rips across the clouds, illuminating the sea for a heartbeat. In that flash, you see the size of the swells around you. Not just rolling hills of water, but towering walls, their crests whipped to white by the wind. The next moment, the light is gone, and you're back in the dim, shifting twilight of the storm. And always, beneath the noise and the motion, there is the knowledge that this is not the worst the sea can offer. The Vikings know it. You begin to suspect it. If the wind grows stronger still, or if a single mistake throws the ship broadside to the waves, the longship could be lost. No matter how skilled the crew, they are always at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. When the storm finally breaks, it does not do so with a burst of sunlight and calm waters. Instead, the change is gradual, almost reluctant. The wind eases from a howl to a deep, restless sigh. The rain becomes a fine mist. The waves lose their sharp edges, but they still rise and fall heavily, as if unwilling to let go of their anger. The crew does not relax. They simply move from crisis to the steady grind of survival. You are drenched through, every layer of wool and linen heavy with seawater. The fabric clings to your skin like a second sodden hide, chafing with each movement. There is no changing into dry clothes. Every garment you brought aboard is soaked. Even if the rain stops entirely, the cold will remain. It is a cold, unlike the crisp chill of a winter's day on land. This is a cold that seeps into you, layer by layer, until it becomes part of your very bones. It comes from all directions, from the wind that slides under your cloak, from the damp planks beneath your feet, from the air itself. Even your breath feels colder leaving your mouth than it did going in. The Vikings had ways to endure this. Their cloaks, woven from thick wool and often treated with lanolin, shed some of the water and held warmth better than modern fabrics might in the same conditions. They knew how to layer garments so the body's own heat was trapped. They knew how to keep moving to prevent the numbness from creeping into fingers and toes. You, however, are discovering that your body's limits come far sooner. Your hands ache with a deep throbbing pain, the kind that makes it hard to grip the oar without feeling as though your joints are turning to stone. Your feet are blocks inside your boots. You can no longer tell where the leather ends and your toes begin. There is no fire aboard a Viking longship at sea. The open deck offers no safe place for flames, and the motion of the ship would make cooking or warming by fire impossible. Warmth must come from movement, from huddling with your crewmates, or from sheer stubborn endurance. The men around you may pull their cloaks tighter, shift to sit closer together, or stamp their feet, but none of these things bring comfort. They bring survival, nothing more. The cold changes the way you think. Your mind feels sluggish, your focus narrowing to whatever task is directly in front of you, rowing, adjusting a rope, keeping your balance on the shifting deck. You have no energy to imagine the shore or to dream about the end of the voyage. The horizon feels infinite and the world beyond it irrelevant. This is when the body begins to betray you. You notice your hands don't quite respond as quickly as you mean them to. The oar slips in your grip for the first time. You shake your head to clear it, but the fog in your mind lingers. For the Vikings, this was the dangerous edge of exhaustion. The point at which inattention could mean a missed order, a poorly tied knot, or a fumbled weapon if danger appeared. For you, it feels like the line between discomfort and collapse. And still, there is no stopping. The work goes on, because to stop is to risk the ship's progress, to risk the whole voyage. Every man must keep moving, not just to keep the longship on course, but to keep the cold from winning. At night, the dampness grows worse. The mist that lingers after the storm settles on every surface, on your cloak, your skin, the benches you sit on. Sleep offers no escape, for when you lie down, the warmth drains from you faster. You wake more tired than you were when you closed your eyes, your limbs heavy and stiff, your breath clouding in the dark. There is a cruel truth to this kind of voyage. You never truly warm up. Even on the rare, bright days when the sun breaks through and the deck dries, the chill remains in your bones. It is as if the sea itself has claimed a piece of you, and it will not give it back until you stand on dry land again, if you ever do. The Vikings were not immune to this. They suffered frostbite, illness, and exhaustion, but they endured it as part of their reality. For them, the cold was not an enemy to be beaten, but a companion to be accepted. For you, it is something else entirely, a constant, grinding reminder that you are far from home, far from the life you understand, and that the voyage is only just beginning. The sea has its own sense of time, and out here, days blur together until you stop counting them. You measure the passing of time not by the sun or the stars, but by the small, infrequent moments when you are handed something to eat. It is never enough to satisfy, only enough to keep you working. Food aboard a Viking longship was not meant to be enjoyed. It was meant to last. Every item in the stores had to survive weeks without spoiling through damp air, constant motion, and sudden changes in weather. There were no barrels of fresh fruit, no sacks of soft bread, no warm stews to ladle into bowls. Instead, you ate what the Vikings called seafaring fare, hard, dry, and plain. The staple was hardtack, a dense, unleavened biscuit baked until it was as hard as wood. It had almost no flavor, but its dryness kept it from molding, even when stored for months. To eat it, you often had to soak it in water or broth, otherwise it risked cracking a tooth. Alongside it came strips of dried fish or smoked meat, salty, chewy, and filling only in the most technical sense. Sometimes there was butter, kept in wooden containers, but it was rationed carefully. Cheese, when available, was a hard, aged variety that could survive the journey without rotting. Water was kept in barrels, and it too was rationed. After weeks at sea, it developed a stale, earthy taste. Some crews carried ale instead, as it kept longer and was less prone to contamination. But on long voyages, even that could sour. Drinking too much at once was discouraged, not only because supplies were limited, but because overfilling your stomach in rough seas almost guaranteed sickness. Fresh food was a rare luxury. If the weather allowed and time permitted, the crew might drop lines over the side to fish. A sudden catch could transform the mood of the ship, the smell of roasting fish. If the ship was anchored and a fire could be built on shore, bringing a kind of joy that only scarcity can make possible. But more often, the lines came up empty, and the day's fare remained unchanged. For someone from the modern world, used to regular meals rich in variety, this diet would quickly take its toll. The saltiness of the dried meat and fish made you thirstier, yet the limited water meant you could never truly quench it. The hardtack, though filling at first, sat in your stomach like a stone. Without fresh vegetables or fruit, your body would begin to weaken in ways you might not immediately notice. A slower recovery from exertion, a creeping fatigue that even rest couldn't erase. On long voyages, some men developed scurvy, their gums swelling and bleeding, their strength fading until they could barely lift an oar. The Vikings knew this risk, but their solutions were limited. On some routes, they would carry barrels of pickled vegetables or dried berries to fend off illness, but these were quickly eaten and rarely replaced until the next port. Most of the time, they simply endured. Eating itself was not a leisurely event. There were no proper meals where the ship stopped and everyone gathered. Instead, you ate where you sat, passing around food in shared sacks or containers, tearing off bites between strokes of the oar or during brief moments when the wind carried the ship forward. The food was cold, the portions small, and there was no lingering afterward. Worse still was the constant possibility of losing your supplies. A single rough wave could wash away a bag of provisions if it wasn't tied down securely. In such cases, the loss was felt immediately, not just in hunger, but in the tightening of rations for the days ahead. Hunger changes a person. It dulls your patience, sharpens your irritability, and narrows your world until all you can think about is the next bite. Out here, where every scrap of food is precious, you begin to understand why disputes over rations could turn bitter, even violent. On a longship, trust in your shipmates extended to believing they would not take more than their share, even when temptation was great. The Vikings endured hunger as they endured cold and exhaustion as an unavoidable part of their way of life. For them, it was something to be managed, worked around, and accepted. For you, it is yet another reminder that you are living in a world where comfort has no place, and survival depends on enduring one deprivation after another without breaking. The sea does not need to sink a ship to harm the men aboard it. Day after day, the voyage works against the human body in smaller, quieter ways that add up until even the strongest begin to falter. You might not notice it at first, a sore muscle here, a cut on your hand there, but these small wounds are constant, and the longship offers no real place for recovery. Your hands bear the brunt of it. The oar handles are smooth from years of use, but the constant friction wears at your palms until the skin tears. Blisters form, burst, and harden into calluses, only to split again under the strain. Salt water stings the open skin, keeping the pain sharp and fresh. There is no ointment to soothe it, no clean bandage to wrap it in. At best, you might tear a strip of cloth from your clothing and tie it tightly, hoping it holds. Your feet fare no better. Even inside sturdy leather boots, they remain damp for days at a time. The constant moisture softens the skin, making it prone to cracks and sores. If the voyage is long enough, the combination of cold, wet, and friction can cause what modern medicine calls trench foot, a condition that leaves toes swollen, numb, and sometimes permanently damaged. Then there are the bruises and scrapes from the ship itself. The longship is a living thing in motion, and when it lurches suddenly, you might slam your hip into the bench or your shoulder against the side. An unsecured rope can whip across your legs with enough force to leave a welt. A rolling barrel can crush your foot. The sea does not care if you're ready for its movements. It will throw you where it wants to. The larger injuries are more frightening. A fall overboard in calm water is dangerous enough, but in rough seas, it is almost always fatal. Even a strong swimmer would be powerless against the waves, and the ship cannot simply turn around in an instant. If you are not pulled back in immediately, the longship will pass you by, and the cold water will claim you within minutes. The crew knows this, which is why they keep a sharp eye on one another during storms. Not from sentiment, but from the understanding that every man is needed to reach the shore. Illness is another quiet enemy. The cold and damp wear down the body's defenses, and there is no escaping either. A cough picked up early in the voyage can turn into something far worse by the end. There is no medicine, no healer aboard. Just what knowledge the crew carries in their heads and what supplies they can spare. A poultice might be made from herbs carried in a pouch. A wound might be cleaned with salt water, but most ailments are left to heal on their own. Some do, others do not. Sleep deprivation makes it all worse. Injuries that might have healed with rest instead linger, pain settling into your muscles and joints like an unwanted passenger. Your reflexes slow, your grip weakens, and your balance falters. On a longship, these small changes can mean the difference between catching yourself in time and being thrown hard against the deck or over the side. The Vikings accepted these risks because they had no choice. Voyages were dangerous work, and injury was simply part of the cost. They hardened themselves against it from youth, learning to ignore discomfort, to work through pain, and to adapt when their bodies failed them. You, untrained and untested, would discover that the sea does not allow weakness. Out here, the smallest wound can become the greatest threat, and the voyage gives you no pause to recover before the next hardship arrives. Even when the sea is calm and the wind steady, there is no such thing as true rest aboard a Viking longship. The voyage demands constant attention, and every man is a piece of the ship's living machinery. It is not enough to row and haul the sail. Someone must always be watching, reading the world around the vessel as though it were a book written in shifting clouds, restless water, and distant shadows. This duty is the watch, an unbroken cycle of eyes scanning the horizon, the sky, and the ship itself for signs of change or danger. On land, a moment's inattention might be a small thing. At sea, it can be the beginning of disaster. The lookout's position is usually at the prow, the forward tip of the ship. Here, The wind cuts hardest, and the spray leaps up to soak your face. You stand braced against the constant motion, knees bent to absorb the longship's rise and fall. Your eyes strain to make sense of the shifting shapes ahead, a scrap of land on the horizon, the pale flash of another sail, the jagged black line of rocks just beneath the water's surface. There is no instrument to guide you, no binoculars to sharpen your vision. Your only tools are your eyes and your knowledge of what the sea's signs mean. The Vikings learned this from childhood. They could read the color of the water to tell its depth, or judge the coming of bad weather from the shape of a distant cloud bank. You, however, are guessing. Every ripple and shimmer seems to hold meaning, and you do not know which are warnings and which are nothing at all. The watch is not just for what lies ahead. The helmsman depends on constant reports of the ship's surroundings. A sudden shift in the wind might require trimming the sail. A change in the waves could signal shallows or a hidden reef. Even the flight of seabirds is noted. Certain species stay close to shore, and their presence can tell the crew they are nearing land long before it appears on the horizon. The watch also serves a more immediate purpose, guarding against other ships. Not every sail that appears on the horizon is friendly. The Vikings were both traders and raiders, and they knew well that their own vessels could be prey. The sight of a distant ship could mean an opportunity for trade or an approaching enemy. Decisions had to be made quickly, whether to flee, to prepare for battle, or to approach with caution. At night, the watch becomes even more difficult. The sea is an endless black expanse, the horizon vanishing into darkness. Your only guides are the stars, if the sky is clear, and the faint silver of moonlight on the waves. The air is colder now, the dampness heavier. You wrap your cloak tighter, but your fingers still go numb around the hilt of the knife you carry. Not for show, but because the night watch is the most dangerous time to be caught unprepared. Every sound is amplified in the dark. The creak of the hull, the slap of water against the sides, the distant cry of a seabird. Each noise demands your attention. Sometimes you hear things that are not there, the sea's endless rhythm playing tricks on your mind. Fatigue makes it worse. The hours stretch on. Your eyelids grow heavy, and still you must stand alert, ready to call out at the
first sign of trouble. If an enemy were to attack at night, there would be no warning but the sound of oars cutting through water or the sudden silhouette of a sail against the stars. The Vikings knew this, and they rotated the watch so no one man bore the burden for too long. But even so, the exhaustion accumulated. You would find yourself blinking hard to stay awake, shivering not just from the cold, but from the strain of forcing your mind to remain sharp.
The unending vigil is not only about looking outward. Part of the watch is keeping an eye on the crew itself. A man who collapses at the oar from exhaustion, or who grows sick and cannot work, is noticed quickly. Supplies are checked, ropes are inspected, and leaks are searched for constantly. The ship is both a home and a weapon, and it must be kept ready for whatever the next hour brings. This is the reality of life aboard the longship. Even in moments that might seem peaceful to an outsider, the crew is never idle. The sea demands attention without pause. The smallest lapse can cost lives. And for someone like you, unused to standing in the cold for hours, eyes fixed on an endless horizon, it is not merely tiring. It is a test of endurance that wears away at your mind until the thought of a warm bed and still ground becomes almost unbearable. The most difficult part of the watch is not the physical discomfort. Though the cold wind and the ache in your legs are constant companions, it is the weight of knowing that your attention is the only barrier between safety and catastrophe. You cannot drift into thought, cannot lose yourself in the rhythm of the sea. Every blink feels like it lasts too long. The Vikings understood that the ocean, for all its beauty, is never neutral. One moment, it might seem calm, even inviting, and the next, it could hide dangers that would tear a ship apart. A floating log carried miles from shore could splinter against the hull if unseen until too late. A bank of fog could swallow the world, leaving the ship blind and vulnerable. Even in perfect weather, an unseen sandbar could ground the vessel in seconds. The watch teaches a kind of awareness that seeps into your bones. You begin to notice things you never would have on land. The way the swell changes shape just before a wind shift. The faint trace of foam where a current meets a hidden obstruction. The different pitch in the creak of the hull when the sea grows heavier beneath it. But learning these signs takes time, more time than you have. And until then, your body is tense with uncertainty, unsure if you are missing something vital. As the hours pass, you find your mind playing tricks. Shadows on the water take the shape of ships that vanish when you blink. A low cloud looks like land until the wind tears it apart. Fatigue dulls the edges of reality, and you begin to understand why the Vikings rotated their men so frequently. No one can stare into an endless horizon without eventually seeing ghosts. Yet the duty never ends. When your turn at the watch is over, another man takes your place and you drop down into the ship. But the knowledge stays with you. Someone is always watching because the sea is always moving. Even as you try to rest, you feel your ears straining for a shout from the prow, your body ready to be called back to work in an instant. And so the longship moves forward, not through trust, in the waves or the wind, but through the unbroken chain of human vigilance. A chain in which you, tired and untrained, are the weakest link. No matter the purpose of a voyage, trade, exploration, or a return journey home, a Viking longship was never free from the shadow of violence. The sea was not an empty space. It was a network of routes, each one used by merchants, raiders, and kingdoms both friend and foe. Encounters between ships were inevitable, and they did not always end in peace. You might imagine that you'd see trouble coming from far away, a distant sail, a warning cry, time to prepare. But the reality at sea is far more sudden. The horizon is vast, and ships are small against it. An enemy can remain hidden behind a wave or a curve of coastline until they are frighteningly close. A fog bank can conceal them entirely until the distance between you is measured in seconds. The first sign might be a speck of movement at the edge of vision, a dark shape growing slowly larger. The lookout shouts, and instantly the mood aboard the longship changes. Orders are barked, oars are shifted, and the sail is trimmed for speed or stowed entirely for maneuverability. Every man knows his role. For the Vikings, this drill is second nature. For you, it's chaos. If escape is possible, the ship may turn and run with the wind. But a longship's greatest strength is its ability to close the distance quickly, and your pursuer knows this as well. Often, running only delays the inevitable. When it becomes clear that battle is unavoidable, preparations shift. Shields are pulled from their racks along the gunwales, weapons brought up from storage. The deck, already crowded, becomes a tangle of armed men readying for combat on a platform that pitches and rolls beneath their feet. You can feel the tension in the air, not fear exactly, but the coiled focus of men who have done this before. The Vikings were warriors long before they were sailors. For many, the fight ahead is simply another part of the voyage. But for you, the reality of standing on an open deck with no cover, armed only with whatever weapon is thrust into your hand, is almost paralyzing. The ships close quickly. You can see the faces of the men on the other vessel now, their hair whipped by the wind, their shields raised. The water between you churns as both crews row hard, closing the final stretch. The sound of the sea is drowned out by the clash of wood on wood as the hulls slam together. Grappling hooks bite into the gunwales. The ships are bound, and there is nowhere to go but forward. Combat on a longship is a brutal, close quarters affair. There is no room for sweeping swordplay or elaborate maneuvers. The fighting is shield to shield, man to man, in a narrow, unstable space. The deck is slippery with seawater, and soon enough, blood. A fall means more than injury. If you go overboard in the chaos, itself. The raised prow for high strikes, the narrow deck to funnel attackers into smaller numbers. They push forward in unison, shield walls surging and breaking like waves. You, with no such training, find yourself struggling just to keep your footing, the oar calluses on your hands, no match for the weight and shock of repeated blows. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ends. The enemy, beaten back or outnumbered, disengages. The hooks are cut loose, the ships drift apart, and the longship resumes its course. The crew takes stock, wounds bound, weapons cleaned, the dead committed to the sea. The air is thick with the scent of battle and the unspoken knowledge that it could happen again at any time. For the Vikings, this was simply part of the journey. For you, it is a reminder that the sea is not a neutral ground. It is a contested space, and aboard a longship, you are always sailing into someone else's territory. The moments after a fight are strangely quiet. The sea still moves beneath you, but after the pounding rhythm of combat, its sway feels almost unnatural. Men breathe heavily, leaning on shields or sitting against the benches. Some clutch at wounds, others help bind them with strips of cloth torn from cloaks or shirts. There is no celebration, only the grim work of returning the ship to order. The deck is slick, not only from seawater, but from the blood of friend and foe alike. It must be washed quickly, both for safety and for morale. Buckets are lowered, water hauled up, and the boards scrubbed with whatever rags can be spared. The smell is strong, iron and salt mixing in the damp air, and it lingers long after the stains are gone. The weapons are checked, blades are wiped clean, nicks inspected, edges honed on whetstones pulled from small leather pouches. The Vikings knew a dull weapon could be as dangerous to its wielder as to his enemy. Arrows are counted, shafts repaired, headland and find yourself in calm harbour waters with a welcoming shore before you. Instead, land announces itself in pieces. The first hint is the smell. Faint at first, then stronger as the hours pass. After weeks of breathing nothing but salt air and damp wood, the scent of earth, grass, and growing things is startling. It feels almost heavy in your lungs, thick with life. The lookout calls down, pointing toward the horizon. At first, you see nothing but the endless grey line where sea meets sky. Then, slowly, darker shapes emerge. Low hills, a jagged rise of cliffs, the pale curve of a sandy shore. The crew's mood shifts subtly. They row with more vigour, voices rising in conversation. Some exchange quiet smiles. They do not cheer. Vikings did not tempt the sea's temper by celebrating too soon. The longship moves closer, the details sharpening, the green of trees clinging to slopes, the glint of freshwater streams spilling down to meet the tide, the white foam breaking on hidden rocks near the shore. Navigation becomes precise now. The helmsman studies the water, watching for the telltale change in colour that marks shallows. Orders are given in clipped phrases. The oars pull in unison, turning the ship toward a safe approach. For you, the sight of land is a relief so deep it feels like a weight lifting from your chest. Your arms ache, your back burns, and yet you find strength for each stroke, knowing the end is near. You imagine stepping onto solid ground, feeling it unmoving beneath your feet, sleeping in a place where the floor will not sway in the night. The approach is not without danger. The shallows can hide treacherous rocks, and an incoming tide can turn a landing into a struggle. The Vikings are cautious, adjusting their course to ride the waves in at just the right angle. As the keel scrapes against sand or gravel, the crew moves quickly. Oars shipped, shields slung over shoulders, ropes thrown to secure the vessel. Stepping ashore feels strange. The ground is steady, but your body sways unconsciously, still tuned to the motion of the sea. The air is warmer here, and the breeze smells of soil and vegetation. Your legs are stiff, your boots heavy with damp, but each step carries you further from the weeks of cold, hunger, and unending labour. The crew wastes no time. Cargo is unloaded, goods for trade, supplies for the return voyage, the personal belongings of each man. Repairs begin almost at once, for the ship must be made ready again. The sea is their road, and it will call them back soon enough. For you, the voyage is over, but the experience has left its mark. You know now the cold that creeps into your bones and never truly leaves, the hunger that gnaws without pause, the constant labour that turns muscles into knots, the watch that robs you of sleep, and the sudden, violent danger that can erupt without warning. You have felt the sea's moods. its moments of grace, its endless patience, and its merciless wrath. The Vikings lived with this as their reality, shaping their lives around the demands of the ocean. For them, such a voyage was not something to survive once, but something to repeat again and again. For you, even one crossing has shown that this world belongs to them, not to you. And as you look back toward the longship, resting now on the sand, you understand why you would not survive a single day in their place.